The gastrointestinal system. The human digestive system starts as the food enters the mouth. The mouth consists of several structures that perform the first step of digestion: the teeth, tongue, and palate, which helps for the mechanical digestion of food, divides the food into several hundred pieces. This serves two important purposes. It makes swallowing of the food much easier, and it increases the surface area of the food, making the action of enzymes much faster. The mouth also receives secretions from salivary glands, which consists of parotid gland, submandibular gland, and sublingual gland. The saliva contains two important enzymes, the amylase and lipase, which help to start the digestion of starch by breaking it into smaller sugars and fats into simple lipids. The tongue contains thousands of taste receptors contained in structures known as taste buds. These give the four basic tastes: bitter, sour, salt, and sweet. After the food has been chewed and mixed with the saliva, it then passes into the oropharynx and then into the esophagus through a series of controlled muscle contractions known as deglutition reflex. The pharynx is a conducting zone that is a part of both the respiratory tract as well as the digestive system. The pharynx continues down to the esophagus. It also receives the opening of the larynx anteriorly. The epiglottis is a piece of cartilage that covers the opening of the larynx. When we eat, the larynx opening is closed, and this prevents the food from entering the respiratory tract. The bolus is then passed down into the esophagus. The next part of the digestive system is the esophagus, which is a muscular tube through which the food passes into the stomach. It passes through the posterior mediastinum and enters the abdomen through a hole in the diaphragm and joins the stomach. The wall of the esophagus consists of four layers, namely tunica mucosa, tunica submucosa, tunica muscularis, and tunica adventitia. The tunica submucosa has mucous glands that prevent excoriation and protection to the walls of the esophagus. The upper third of muscularis externa is composed of skeletal muscle fibers, whereas the lower third is composed of smooth muscle fibers that propels the food forward through muscular contractions known as peristalsis. These muscles are very strong at the lower end to form the lower esophageal sphincter, which has a valve-like function. It remains constricted at all times to prevent the contents of the stomach from entering into the esophagus. When we eat and drink, it allows one-way movement of food. The next organ is the stomach, which is composed of four major parts: the cardia, fundus, body, and pylorus. The bolus passes through the cardia to enter the stomach. The layers of the stomach wall are tunica mucosa, tunica submucosa, tunica muscularis, and tunica serosa. The tunica mucosa has oxyntic glands which consist of surface mucous cells that secretes bicarbonate-rich juices, stem cells, and secretory epithelial cells, namely mucous neck cells that secretes mucus, chief cells that secretes pepsinogen, parietal cells that secretes hydrochloric acid and intrinsic factor, and lastly, enteroendocrine cells that secretes serotonin and gastrin. Since these chemicals can damage the stomach wall, the pyloric glands, located on the antral region, has mucous cells that secretes mucus to lubricate food movements and protects the stomach wall from digestion of gastric enzyme, and G cells that secretes gastrin to control gastric acid secretion. The tunica muscularis has layers of smooth muscles which cause waves of muscular contractions known as peristalsis that cause mechanical mixing or churning of food contents. The stomach also serves as a storage of food. The pylorus also has a strong smooth muscle sphincter called the pyloric sphincter that opens usually after 1 hour of taking a meal. Until then, the food has been converted into a semi-liquid form known as chyme, which is slowly released forward. The chyme passes into the small intestine, which is a 5-meter-long tube divided into 3 major parts: the duodenum, jejunum, and ileum. The walls of the small intestine consist of 4 layers: the tunica mucosa, tunica submucosa, tunica muscularis, and tunica serosa. The tunica mucosa contains crypts of libercun, which lie between the intestinal villi. The surfaces of both the crypts and the villi are covered by simple columnar epithelium composed of 2 types of cells: goblet cells, which secretes mucus that lubricates and protects the intestinal surfaces, and enterocytes, which in the crypts secrete large quantities of water and electrolytes, and over the surfaces of adjacent villi reabsorb the water and electrolytes along with the end products of digestion. The small intestine has the main job of digestion and absorption of food. This is performed by abundant enzymes through the liver, pancreas, gallbladder, and the small intestinal wall. The duodenum receives strong acidic chyme which can potentially damage its wall, so it produces bicarbonate-rich alkaline secretions that neutralize the acid. It also receives secretions from the gallbladder, pancreas, and liver. These secretions contain numerous enzymes that digest the food and convert it into simple molecules that are easy to absorb and utilize by the body. The liver contains a portal triad consisting of a branch of the hepatic artery, a branch of the portal vein, and bile ductules. Branches of the hepatic artery carry oxygenated blood to the hepatocytes, while branches of the portal vein carry blood with nutrients from the small intestine. The bile duct carries bile products away from the hepatocytes to the larger ducts and gallbladder. The hepatocytes produce bile, which consists of water, bile salts, bile pigments, and mucus. These secretions flow through the bile canaliculi, bile ductules, and bile ducts. These structures gradually merge to form the common hepatic duct that joins the cystic duct from the gallbladder and continues to the duodenum as the common bile duct. The gallbladder is used to store bile and concentrate it. Bile helps to emulsify the fats in the chyme and leads to the formation of micelles, which are easy to digest and absorb. To move stored bile into the duodenum, contraction of the gallbladder muscularis is induced by cholecystokinin released from the intestinal cells. Release of cholecystokinin is in turn stimulated by the presence of ingested fats in the small intestine. The bile then empties to the cystic ducts, which eventually merges with the common bile duct. The pancreas, which lies behind the stomach, has both an exocrine and endocrine part. The endocrine function of the pancreas involves the islets of Langerhans that produce insulin and glucagon. Meanwhile, the acinar and centroacinar cells comprise the exocrine portion of the pancreas. The acinar cells are stimulated by cholecystokinin and acetylcholine to secrete the pancreatic enzymes including the amylase, peptidase, and lipase. Secretin, in contrast, stimulates secretion of bicarbonate-rich fluid, which neutralizes the acidic chyme entering from the stomach. The pancreatic enzymes and bicarbonate-rich fluid flows into the intercalated ducts, which merge with the intralobular ducts and larger interlobular ducts into the main pancreatic duct before joining the common bile duct. Secretions from the gallbladder, liver, and pancreas through the common bile duct forms a channel called the ampulla of Vater that enters to the duodenum directly. Approximately after an hour you take a meal, the food starts to enter the duodenum, where all these enzymes and bile start their action. The food then passes slowly from duodenum to jejunum and then to the ileum. Most of the digestion of food takes place in the duodenum, where proteins are converted into peptides and simple amino acids by the action of pancreatic enzymes, mainly chymotrypsin and trypsin. The fat in your diet is converted into simple molecules like fatty acids and glycerol. Lipase is the main fat-digesting enzyme, whereas the bile from the liver helps to digest the fats. Additionally, amylase converts complex carbohydrates into simple sugars. Enzymes from the intestinal wall, known as brush border enzymes, such as your lactase, maltase, sucrase, and dextrinase, all of these complex foods are broken down into simple molecules which are easy to absorb. The wall of the small intestine contains layers of smooth muscle, which cause segmental contractions that move the food forward slowly. The carbohydrates, fats, and proteins and other nutrients are completely digested slowly over a period of 3 to 5 hours. Chyme is moved through the small intestine via two mechanisms, mixing and propulsive movements. When a portion of the small intestine becomes distended with chyme, stretching of the intestinal wall elicits localized concentric contractions spaced at intervals along the intestine and lasting a fraction of a minute. The contractions cause segmentation of the small intestine, which chops the chyme 2 to 3 times per minute, in this way promoting progressive mixing of the food with secretions of the small intestine. Chyme is propelled by peristaltic waves that can occur in any part of the small intestine and move toward the anus. Peristaltic activity increases markedly after a meal, which is stimulated by the stretching of the duodenal wall upon entry of chyme. In addition, it is also increased by the gastroenteric and gastroileal reflexes. Several hormones also affect intestinal peristalsis. These factors include gastrin, cholecystokinin, insulin, motilin, and serotonin, all of which enhance intestinal motility and are secreted during various phases of food processing. Conversely, secretin and glucagon inhibit small intestine motility. The microscopic structure of the wall of the small intestine consists of small projections on the surface, which are known as villi. These villi in turn have small projections on their surface, which are known as microvilli. The presence of villi and microvilli on the surface of the small intestine increases the surface area of the small intestine tremendously, which makes it super effective to absorb these digested simple food materials. These molecules cross the cells of these microvilli and are then taken up into the bloodstream and lymphatics present in the center of these villi. After most of the food is digested and absorbed in the small intestine, the rest of the food passes into the large intestine. The large intestine begins with the cecum, which marks a distinction between the small and the large colon. The large intestine is divided into ascending, transverse, and descending colon. The descending colon then leads into the sigmoid colon, which then leads into the rectum, and that finally leads into the anal canal. The anal canal consists of internal and external anal sphincters. The internal anal sphincter is made up of smooth muscle, which is involuntary, whereas the external anal sphincter is made up of skeletal muscle, which is voluntary. The wall of the large intestine, from cecum to rectum, consists of 4 layers, namely tunica mucosa, tunica submucosa, tunica muscularis, and tunica serosa. There is an abrupt change of the outermost layer of the anal canal from tunica serosa to tunica adventitia. The proximal half of the colon absorbs water and electrolytes from the chyme to form solid feces, while the distal half of the colon is for storage of fecal matter until it can be expelled by the anal canal. Because intense colon wall movements are not required for these functions, the movements are normally sluggish but have characteristics similar to those of the small intestine. Large circular constrictions occur in the large intestine, and at the same time, the longitudinal muscle of the colon, which is aggregated into 3 longitudinal strips called tinea coli, contracts. These combined contractions of the circular and longitudinal strips of muscle cause the unstimulated portion of the large intestine to bulge outward into bag-like sacs called hastrations, wherein all the fecal material is gradually exposed to the mucosal surface of the large intestine, and fluid and dissolved substances are progressively absorbed. Much of the propulsion in the cecum and ascending colon results from the slow but persistent haustral contractions. From the cecum to the sigmoid, mass movements can take over the propulsive role. First, a constrictive ring occurs in response to a distended or irritated point in the colon. Then rapidly, the 20 or more centimeters of colon distal to the constrictive ring lose their haustrations and instead contract as a unit, propelling the fecal material down the colon. The appearance of mass movements after meals is facilitated by gastrocolic and duodenocolic reflexes. These reflexes result from distension of the stomach and duodenum. After this, the remaining material turns almost solid, which is compacted in stools and stored in the rectum until it is excreted through the anus. When a mass movement forces feces into the rectum, the desire for defecation occurs immediately, including reflex contraction of the rectum and relaxation of the anal sphincters. Ordinarily, defecation is initiated by defecation reflexes. One of these reflexes is the intrinsic reflex mediated by the local enteric nervous system in the rectal wall. So in summary, this is the flow of the food from the mouth to the anus.
Jed,
Uy,
basta. Ano
Ano?
ka sa balita? Si Loy baka ito silingan. Matay na daw.
katong palahubog na tatawang silingan?
Oo, ang storya nila, nagabi daw kay uli siya ubog kayo. Niyawa na daw kamata karong buntag, ambot lagyan sa katinuod.
O lagi, ayag pamanto na ako to siya nakita dito sa tindahan nga hubog na kayo. Ano sa managaling nung danan? Ano namatay man siya?
Ambot kay ang storya nila, iurom daw. Ambot sa sad katinuod lagi mga storya lahi-lahi man.
Pero namang ko kayo nadunggan pod nga kanang mga palahubog ba kay kakamatay yun na sila dili tungod sa urong pero tungod sa pancreatitis.
Ah, mao ba?
Pancreatitis per se is inflammation of the pancreas. Okay, so the pancreas is a digestive organ that's very rich in enzymes. So it is a It is a question of compartmentalization of all these enzymes. And so when there is injury to the parenchyma of your pancreas, this compartmentalization gets destroyed. And so what happens is these enzymes that are important for digestion starts to attack the pancreas. Ang pasyente comes in because of grabe kasakit. Kung imong i-grado ang pain from 0 to 10, kung sa may grado nimo, musulti sila sakit, yun kayo daw. And sometimes the patient buckles up because of the pain. And I ask them, asa na people dagan ang pain, mudagan sa likod or mudagan sa shoulder. So that's very characteristic of biliary pain, or pancreatitis. There are also symptoms of vomiting, and then sometimes other patients have signs of fever or inflammation. And then upon examination of the patient, sakit kaayo ang iyang tututubog. Sometimes to the point na hindi mo makita.
One of the most common causes of pancreatitis is gallstone. Other causes of pancreatitis is alcoholism, very common. So gallstone and alcoholism are the two common causes of pancreatitis. Other causes are familial hypertriglyceridemia, elevated triglycerides. Other problems, infection, like if you're an ascaris, goes inside your biliary tract, causes obstruction, can cause pancreatitis. Other metabolic disorders that are inherent to the pancreas. Alcohol itself is toxic to both pancreas and liver. Alcohol can elevate triglyceride acutely and causes photocatalytic activation of your pancreatic enzyme, thus causing pancreatitis.
As much as possible, hindi mag-inom. Or kung mag-inom, maganin mo. Kaya siguro pang-respetar lang, but not to the point of intoxication. So, manang ang uban, after drinking, magbangungot, they go into an attack. That's because of inflammation of the pancreas, just due to alcohol intake. It's not that common, but it can happen.
At the end of the day, we are the creators of our destiny. It's your choice and decision. We all have the time to change.
And that change starts in you.
Aron maprotektahan ang atong digestive tract ug malikayan ang mga seryosong sakit, atong likayan ang tambok nga pagkaon, likayan ang bisyo sama sa pag-inom og panigarilyo, magkaon og mas sustansyang pagkaon sama sa gulay ug prutas, apilan og saktong ehersisyo, ug pag-inom og daghang tubig.